Sky News are reporting that the UK supplied Storm Shadow missiles, which are a good form of tech, partially supplied by the United States of America and all the rest of it. The ones that we supplied have been fired at targets inside Russia. Now, Eunice, this is something that you've been quite vocal about, but I see this, I don't know if you agree with this, but I see this as President Biden trying to secure a legacy for himself, which may risk actually escalating the war even further. I mean, who knows if Putin might have his finger on the nuclear button right now, for all I know. But actually that this risks an escalation where at a time when President Trump is going to come in, and even President Zelensky himself said that he assumes that the war will end a hell of a lot sooner than it otherwise would under President Trump's leadership. So this is Biden trying to secure a legacy before he retires and risking World War III. I mean, I couldn't imagine anything more bloody selfish. This bloody horrible, selfish geriatric.
What legacy, though? I don't really understand, because your legacy is, you started World War III. Well done, Joe. You was probably the worst president of United States in modern history, and now you started World War III. Yeah, what a great legacy. No, look, I'm going to try to be fair to both sides on this, because I know there's a lot of pro-Ukrainian people, there's a lot of pro-Russian people. Let's not forget that Crimea was invaded under Obama. Then Trump was elected, and we had 4 years of misinformation saying he's a Russian asset, Russia hoax. The only reason why Trump won the presidency in 2016 is because the Russians spread misinformation online. All of that was proven to be a lie under the Mueller report. Yeah, so they spent 3 years trashing him, and it was all a lie. It was all propagated by the Clinton campaign, that they couldn't swallow the hard pill of loss. Then in 2020, Biden gets into power, and then after 1.5 years, Putin invades Ukraine. Yeah, what was the reason for that? There's several reasons for that. So this whole idea that Trump was a Russian asset, Putin didn't take an inch of Ukraine under Trump, not an inch. But he attacked Crimea, and part of that is strength and leadership and knowing who is a strong leader and who not to mess with. But another part of that is that Biden were poking the bear, and they were expanding NATO. And let me just give you an example. If there was a military alliance in which Russia was in a military alliance with Mexico, I'm pretty sure that America would react. So when Russia tells you don't expand NATO eastwards, and then we expanded 1,000 miles, then you're provoking the bear, you're poking the bear, so he's going to respond. Another part of this story is that, Putin is a tyrant, and he's using all of this as an excuse because he wants to invade Ukraine, because he believes that Ukraine was part of Russia for thousands of years, even under the Soviet Union. And hence why Ukraine has a duty to defend itself. I agree with that. Ukraine does have a duty to defend itself, but why now? Why are you escalating the war now? Like, you're going to be out in a month. Why didn't you do this 2 years ago?
That's exactly why.
Why didn't you, okay, fine, Ukraine, you want Ukraine to defend itself? Why didn't you do this 2 years ago? And look, this is the final point I'm going to make. You cannot win a war with Russia. Why? Because Russia is militarily very strong, and also they supply the gas into Europe. The reason why Putin attacked Ukraine in the first place is because Nord Stream 2, which is a gas pipeline that goes from Russia to Europe, was reinstated by Biden. And that literally funded Russia to be able to fund the war. And at the same time, if Putin wishes, he can freeze Europe to death. So you cannot go to war with someone like that has control over your energy sources.
Well, Eunice, hang on about that, because I think you'll find that we don't need President Putin to freeze us all to death. So Keir Starmer is doing a pretty good job of doing that himself. Elliot, on that point that Eunice raises there, I mean, are you of the view that we should never have got involved in this territorial dispute in the first place? I mean, Ukraine was seen by the United Nations as being too bent to actually join the United Nations. So, I mean, at what point do we say, well, we've made ourselves penniless, we were already skint, we've made ourselves even more skint, and that actually we should never have got involved in the first place? Because I tell you what, for saying that, I think this war could have been ended a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm of the opinion that we should never have been involved. The West, but we know that they're an old enemy. since the end of the Second World War and the beginning of the Cold War. And for me, that's all this is about. This is all about just the West and NATO trying to get the upper hand on Russia. And there's lives that are at stake now. If there's World War III kicking off, yes, people are saying NATO is stronger than Russia, even with the military aspect, but there still could be millions of lives lost. And at the end of the day, what is it for? It's not anything that's going to threaten us. I don't think Russia would ever think about threatening America or Western Europe. And yeah, like you said with Ukraine, that they were too crooked to get into the NATO and EU. Yes, the most corrupt country in the world from a top level.
Well,
so I don't really understand why we're getting involved with it, to be honest.
Yeah, Dave on YouTube says it's nothing to do with Biden. I'm pointing at Chloe. Dave says it's nothing to do with Biden. He hasn't made his decision in 4 years, which is probably a pretty fair point. But then Paul on X says Biden blew Nord Stream up. That's why our energy is expensive. Well, Paul, I don't know if that's true. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It certainly seems like it could have been.
That blew it up, actually.
Yeah. Well, yes, good point, Eunice. But actually, the fact of the matter is that should be totally irrelevant to us. We shouldn't be energy independent on foreign states. We shouldn't be energy dependent. We should be energy independent, but we shouldn't rely on unreliable renewables as well, right? That's the bizarre position that our so-called leaders have dragged us into. Now, I want to get to Ben Habib, otherwise I'm going to keep you all here all night. But the other thing I wanted to discuss before I do that is, and you pointed this out, Eunice.
Can I just say one last thing after this? Just one last point I wanted to make
on this.
Yeah. So look, the thing is, the longer the war goes on, the more territory Russia is going to take from Ukraine. So now they have about 25% of eastern Ukraine. The longer the war goes on, in 2 years' time, it will be 50%. In 10 years' time, it will be 100%. So it's in the interest of the international community, because you're not going to take back the land that Russia's already taken. That's a fantasy. That's a dream. Putin doesn't spend billions and hundreds of thousands of soldiers to give back the land after 4 years of war or 2 years of war, whatever it may be. So the best way to go forward is to just sacrifice of land. I mean, that's the only way I see this war ending. Putin's not going to give back the land. Give the 25% to him and say, okay, you don't come past this line. You take the 25%, but then we make some sort of military engagement that if you come again into Ukraine, we will attack you really hard. That's all I'm going to say, because it's not worth it for the whole world to get into World War III just because of 25% of Ukrainian land, which is actually majority Russian speaking. Let's not forget that part of the land is majority ethnically Russian.
And if they had a free and fair election, I think even then they would still win.
And we toppled the democratic government. That's the last point I wanted to make. We toppled a democratically elected government that was pro-Russia. We replaced it with a pro-European one. And then that was the reason that Putin went into Crimea in the first place. So again,
let's just all agree.
Influence, toppling democratically elected governments and then getting us into wars.
The West needs to focus on its own bloody problems, which are adding up like you wouldn't bloody believe.